Hello and welcome to this Cresfest world. That incredible funky playing you heard just now is from the Haas sisters from the USA, who were international guests at Cresfest in 2023. My name's Neil Adam and I'm your host. Cresfest is a music festival which takes place every year in April in Creswick, a small country town in rural Victoria near Ballarat, maybe 90 minutes out of Melbourne. Organising a music festival in a small country town puts you in touch with all kinds of interesting people. Some are local, some are not. Some are musicians, some are not. Some of the chat is about music, and guess what? Some is not. This week's episode went off in directions which surprised even me, and I'm supposed to be in charge of it. I rang Jamie and Carol, volunteers at Cresfest 2023. They live in the north of England, and I wanted to ask them about volunteering because I want the world to know what a great thing it is to volunteer in your local community. But after a few minutes talk about that, the conversation moved on to, of all things, marmalade. And then, as they say in the world of horse racing, we were off. We ended up with a range of great conversations with marmalade and music makers from across the world. So this episode has two parts, and in this first one you're going to hear from volunteers who loved being at Cresfest 23 and who then pointed me in the direction of a guitar builder who loves marmalade and a West Australian drummer who's the world champion marmalade maker. En route you'll meet Jane Hazel, the fascinating owner of a stately home in the north of England and the organiser of the Dalmain Marmalade Awards and Festival. One of the world's great marmalade makers gives us his 3 tips for making the best marmalade. Don't miss that. As if that wasn't quite enough, in episode 2 you'll hear the unrequited love story behind the building of a South Australian mansion, you'll hear talk of the Marmalashes trophy, and you'll hear how the drummer's marmalade finally got to the king. But before we get too sidetracked, let's start off where we're supposed to start off, by hearing from Jamie and Carol about their experiences as volunteers at Cresfest 2023. You were two of our notable volunteers, more than 100, who made the festival go last year. Had you ever been volunteers at a festival at all like this before?
No,
Never.
No.
It had always appealed in a certain sort of way, but never. The opportunity was never there, and but yeah. So the answer to your question is no.
Yeah, but this time the opportunity was there. Mm-hmm. And do you think you had certain expectations about what it was going to be like?
I think I was curious as to what it would be like, and sort of had thoughts about, well, how will I know what to do if somebody asks me a question that I can't answer? And they were unfounded fears, really, because it was just fab, really.
Because I think from my perspective, it was just all part and parcel of this idea of saying yes to everything and sort of being open to the unexpected. So I just had quite an open mind about what was going to be happening, and just have a go, and what's the worst that could happen, so.
Is it a bit of a dangerous life plan to say yes to everything?
No, I
think
it
worked so far.
I think it makes life more interesting because you sometimes come across the unexpected.
I loved it. I just felt it was rather than being a spectator and sitting in a concert hall in the audience, only doing that. I felt like I was a part of the whole community, the whole organisation, and I felt to be a part of everything that was going on behind the scenes, and it was just a sense of community, really, was the big thing that hit me. And I'd be walking down the street in my volunteers t-shirt, and people would come up to me and talk to me, and it was just great. It was just so different from buying tickets to go to a concert and only sitting in the concert hall and maybe talking to the person next to you. But beyond that, you were a bit isolated, really. You would have been just isolated. But, it was definitely, for me, the sense of belonging and being part of the whole community of the festival.
Yeah, that's lovely.
And since doing that, since then I've volunteered at a local literary festival near home, and I felt I got the same buzz out of that as well. doing?
I think from my perspective, it's the idea that if you go to a concert, for example, you are a receiver of what is out there. It's nice to be on the other end of the stick and be part of the giver. And making something happen and seeing what it takes to make things happen. But it was just so enjoyable. And I think, as Carol said, being part of the community, being involved, meeting so many lovely people. And, to a man, everybody was just so welcoming and encouraging and supportive. And obviously we didn't know one end of Creswick from the other, but we soon got our way around, and it was just great. Yeah.
Listen, one of the things that stops people volunteering is that they think something unexpected is going to happen and they won't know how to manage it. Did anything like that happen to you?
What I did know was if something unexpected did happen, I knew where to get help. I knew where to go and ask somebody, can you just come and help me here? Can you just do this? Can you just stand here while I go over there? And there were always enough people around to help and to deal with things, really. Yeah.
I should probably tell listeners that Jamie and Carol ran a bakery business. So being involved with culinary pursuits and obsessing about them to a very high level is something that comes particularly naturally to...
Not me.
Since we retired, we've had more time to do things we wanted to do, and I've always fancied having a go at making marmalade. So we were waiting for the Seville orange marmalade, Seville oranges to come into season and be in the supermarkets. And as soon as they arrived, we bought an industrial quantity of orange and a huge Maslin jam pan and set to, and then went onto a website looking for a recipe. Delia Smith came up with some pretty good ones, but in trawling through the World Wide Web, the Dalmain festival came up, and I thought, this is a bit of a rabbit hole. So I looked at it, and I could not believe there was a marmalade festival in Penrith, of all places, which is so close to us, relatively. And it was imminent. I thought, God, this is so good and so exciting. So we went on and discovered that the actual festival day is the 20th of April, which is when the big reveal takes place. But closing dates for entries was something like about the 5th of February. We were away in London 4 days beforehand with all our jars up in Yorkshire. We were down in London. And so the only way to get our marmalade up to Penrith was to do a mad dash on a Monday morning to hit the deadline for entries. So we got in our car with our precious jars of marmalade and drove like mad people through the rain, and not quite the snow, the rain and the mist.
Rained.
It was like a 90-mile trip up to Penrith, and delivered our marmalade
And came back again.
and had a coffee and came back, and it was just the most extraordinary sort of palaver.
I got married to my husband, who essentially is a farmer. He loves his farming, and he has sheep and a few cows. And so that's what I was marrying into, as well as this great big house, which is really a part of a sort of tourist operation.
This is Jane Hazel, owner of Dalmain House in Cumbria in England, and the person who started the Marmalade Festival.
But I think the whole idea behind how we have lived here, and really what we both believe in, is that Dalmain should be lived in, that it should be our home, that our children should grow up here and love it, as my husband does, Robert, and that we should make it as accessible as possible to people. And so this is in a variety of ways. Obviously, we open it to the public, the garden is open to the public, all that kind of thing. But it's also, and what motivates me highly, is doing things where there is a charitable aspect to it, because that's what I enjoy. I wanted to find a charity which could be translatable throughout the world. And so we chose hospice work, and in this area, hospice at home, for people at the end of their lives. because we felt this was absolutely something that people could understand and work with wherever they were. And so over the years, we've raised, through the humble pot of marmalade, we've raised about £250,000.
What a marvellous thing.
Which is lovely. But it wasn't the only reason we did it, because the other very motivational thing for me is community. I like the fact that Dalemain has been part of this community since it was built, which is way back in the 1200s. And then little bits were added on. And then finally, they decided to build a rather grand front to it in the 1700s. And my goodness, it took a long time. Now, the interesting thing from an Australian point of view is that if you go to South Australia and you go to a house called Martindale Hall, that is actually a copy of Dalemain. And the whole story revolves around that and who lived there.
Is that why we have the Marmalashes? Because of your connection to Martindale Hall?
It isn't actually. It was through somebody, absolutely brilliant person called Russell Lacock, who saw that we had a Marmalade Festival. And he thought basically that Australians were better at cricket than the Poms, and so why not introduce a slightly cricketing aspect to the marmalade? And so we always judge 11 good jars and true against another 11 good jars and true, and I have to say, on the whole, Australia wins. And so it's the Dalemain Marmalade Festival in Australia, and
Right.
these amazing women, 5 women, took it on. And they got it all set up with all the sort of legal side and with all the organisational side, not really knowing. I mean, it was a leap of faith, not knowing. I kept on saying, you will be amazed by the magic of marmalade, because even though you're starting from scratch and you don't know what's going to happen, you will get entries. And so this year, the first year, because we did do it in South Australia and we moved to Victoria, but this year they got 300 jars, just coming out of the blue, including Ruben Cooperman, who makes spectacular marmalade.
Wait a minute. Did you say Ruben Cooperman? I know someone called Ruben Cooperman. He used to live in Perth. I think he still does live in Perth. He plays drums in a band that one of my friends, Scott Wise, had going. And I'm sure I know Ruben. I know what, I'll just ask Scott.
My more common marmalade is made with a blend of lime and mandarins.
This is Scott Wise, guitar builder, musician and, oh yeah, marmalade maker, online from Margaret River in Western Australia.
I was using the limes off my lime tree, which are Jamaican limes, so they're the ones that go a bit yellow in this climate here. And I have a fixed ratio of limes to mandarins, and that's done very well for me. I'm about to carve the neck of the guitar I make for Fairbridge Festival every year. I started doing that back in the 90s, and in 93, I think. And I think I'm making the 30th one. It's called Tasmanian Blackwood, but it actually comes from the Otways, and West Australian Wandoo is the fingerboard. And so I'm very happy with that. That is going well. It's the next going to be carved today, and then as soon as possible, I'll be installing the frets.
The last time we chatted, you told me about your disappointments at the Margaret River show this year. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I only came second. I've been winning the marmalade category, but I've been winning it constantly, and then someone picked me. I only came second last show, but I've been doing well. I'm not in my dear friend Ruben Cooperman's class, but I do have a particular knife that I use for slicing the fruit.
Right.
That's extremely sharp. I sharpen it up on my Japanese water stones and stuff, and it's a Japanese Damascus layered blade that's very thin. And the secret to a very sharp knife for taking transparently thin slices of your fruit is having a blade that retains an edge but is also not too thick. I tasted Reuben's marmalade, and it has the most wonderful mouthfeel. In fact, it appeals to all the senses. The colour's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's got a great nose, and in the mouth it's just got this beautiful smooth thing, but you know that there are bits in it at the same time.
So it is the same Ruben Cooperman. I wonder if I can get hold of him.
And first we took the high road, and then we took the low, and I would follow after him wherever he would go. Our days work here or there, we didn't give a damn. We lived on underground.
Great to see you again, Neil. I played on Friday night with the regular band that I play with, which is a band called Pete Stone and the Hilltones, which is a sort of a pretty much a straight up rock and roll band that's sort of focused around swing dancing. We have a lot of swing dancers that come to our gigs, and it's kind of like stepping back in time, but it's a lovely band. And you would know John Reed in that band, who played with me with Kavisha and Rich and Famous. In those years we were sort of active on the circuit, as it were.
So the reason we're sitting here together now is partly to talk music, but actually, I guess, to really talk Marmalade.
Okay, something that's near and dear to my heart and to my palate.
Well, that's great. So you know that I came to be in touch with you because I spoke to Jane Hazel. She said to me, the person you really need to speak to about Marmalade is Ruben. So what I'm hoping to find out from you is how you came to be at Dalmain there. Was it last year?
I was there last year in April for that Marmalade for the King Awards presentation. The Marmalade world is a very lovely world to be inhabiting, and I've been part of the world scene now for that length of time and consistently amongst the prize winners. I guess for me, whereas my music goes back 50 years, my marmalade or preserve making goes back about 40 years.
But it's an extraordinary thing because it infiltrates and covers so much of life. Marmalade, I sometimes think it's so sticky that it sort of somehow gets people involved, and all sorts of surprising people get involved. We've got, out in Australia, we've got this amazing man who's now in his 90s, and he's one of our international patrons. He's called Ian Tolley, and he's often on the radio. He works closely with the Diggers Club, and he is the world expert on citrus. And suddenly there he is, and he is an amazing fount of knowledge. And I once had the great privilege of going to his home and seeing his collection of citrus there. And we walked around, and he had a little penknife, and he said, "Oh, you've got to try this one, Jane." And we'd take one off the tree, and we'd have a little taste of that. And then he'd say, "Now this one's really good for making lemonade." It's just so fascinating.
If I was to ask you for a few tips for marmalade makers, what would you say?
One of the most common faults is people not getting their marmalade to set. And that's, that was when I very first made marmalade back 40 odd years ago, because we had a mandarin tree in the backyard, the problem that I had was it didn't set. And the few things I tell people about getting marmalade to set, I always use more lemon juice. I always use lemon juice in all of my recipes for all of my marmalades, and I make a lot of different varieties of marmalade because I have a number of sources of fruit from dear friends who grow beautiful fruit. So, lemon juice is an integral part of my recipes, and I always use more than the recipes generally indicate. If they say juice of 1 lemon, I might use the juice of 1.5 or 2 lemons, okay? So that's my first tip, is be generous with the lemon juice and don't worry about it diluting flavour. It doesn't. It just helps with the set generally. Second tip is testing for set. The books will tell you there are lots of different ways to test for set, and I use at least 2 of them. But the one that I rely on the most is using a sugar thermometer. And I have a little setup I won't go into too much detail, but I'm able to check the temperature of my marmalade very easily without a lot of inconvenience because of the way I've set it up. So sugar thermometer and getting to know your sugar thermometer is important too. All the books will tell you that marmalade sets at 105 degrees centigrade. What the books don't tell you is that every thermometer you buy might be calibrated in a slightly different way, and so you have to get to know your thermometer, whether it's an analog, one with a needle, or whether it's a digital thermometer. None of them are, I would say, 100% accurate. Maybe some of them are, but so you've got to know exactly where on your thermometer setting point is. Let's say it's 105 degrees centigrade, and that's not a bad guide. So that's tip number 2, testing for set. I would say my preferred method, sugar thermometer. There's also the freezer test. I'm sure you may be familiar with that, where you put a little saucer in the freezer.
Yeah.
When you think the marmalade is set, you put a dollop on there, put it back in the freezer for 5 minutes, then take it out and push it. And if it wrinkles, it's a good chance that it's set. So I always do that anyway, as a sort of a, fail safe, if you like. So testing for set, that's tip number 2. Tip number 3, probably the most important one that gets overlooked, I think, by a lot of people, is once you've added the sugar and you've brought your marmalade to the boil, as tempting as it is, don't stir it. And you shouldn't stir it until you think it's reached setting point. And the reason for that is that stirring marmalade introduces air into the mixture and it lowers the temperature. It's kind of a simple scientific principle. And the idea about getting marmalade to set is you want it to reach a temperature, 105 degrees centigrade or thereabouts. So that's the third thing I would say that a lot of people don't do. A lot of the books will tell you, boil rapidly without stirring, but people do their own thing, right? Everybody thinks they've got their own way of doing it, and everybody does. Like I know dozens, if not hundreds, of marmalade makers all over the world, and they've all got their technique and their favourite way of doing it, and not all of them would agree with me. And if you look on various YouTube videos of people teaching you how to make marmalade on YouTube, some of them will stir their marmalade while it's boiling after they've added the sugar, and I would say that that's not something I do. So those are the 3 things I would say to any novice marmalade maker.
That's a beautiful bit of mouth harp playing, isn't it? And that's Judy Turner, director of Cresfest, playing it. Ruben told me when we were chatting that he has a special playlist that he listens to when he's making marmalade, and that my song from 2002, Underground Mutton and Kwandong Jam, is on it. So I've been playing that a bit in the background of this podcast, and the other background tracks are from our New Dogs Old Tricks CD from 2005, sets of Judy's tunes arranged for our family band. On the song, that's Kavisha singing in the background, you can hear, and the guitar I used on the recording is one of Scott Wise's.
And first we took on the high road, and then we took on the low, and I would follow after him wherever he would go. A day's work here or there, we didn't give a damn. We lived on underground.
In episode 2, you'll hear more from Jane about the unrequited love story behind the building of Martindale Hall at Monaro in South Australia. You'll hear more from Ruben about his experiences while winning the Marmalade Fit for a King award last year, and about the Marmalashes Trophy, the international battle between Australian and English marmalade makers. Who knew, for example, that the trophy, which was won by Australia last year, is kept under lock and key at Buninyong Town Hall, just the other side of Ballarat from us here. For all this and much more, tune into part 2 of this amazing story.
That's it, when my turn comes, that's how I'd like to go. With my coat around my shoulders and my cap in my hand, dreaming of underground mutton and Kwandong jam.
If you've enjoyed this week's podcast, please rate us and subscribe as well. That all helps. John Ebden used to say on the BBC in my childhood, if you have been, thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye-bye.
We lived on underground mutton and Kwandong jam. And first we took on the high road, and then we took on the low, and I would follow after him wherever he would go. A day's work here or there, we didn't give a damn. We lived on underground mutton and Kwandong jam. Lived on underground